My father waited until I was alone by the bar to say it. The engagement party had been going for nearly 2 hours by then, long enough for the champagne to loosen the room, long enough for my presence to stop registering as unusual, long enough for me to begin believing that the evening might simply be what it appeared to be: a celebration, a party, a quiet chance to watch my younger sister be happy in a room full of people who loved her. Then my father appeared at my elbow with a glass of scotch and a tone that hadn't changed in 23 years. "Penny invited you because she's a good person," he said, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "Try not to make her regret it." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water and let the words settle. He looked older, of course. The hair that had once been dark was silver now at the temples, carefully combed. His suit was charcoal gray and pressed with the precision of a man who still believed that appearance was character. His posture remained the same: shoulders back, chin slightly elevated, the bearing of someone who had spent his entire life standing slightly above the conversation. I met his eyes. "It's good to see you too." He didn't answer that. He studied me the way he always had, as if searching for something he expected to find missing. Then, across the restaurant's private dining room, my sister Penny caught my eye over the heads of her guests, and gave me the kind of smile that said, "Please, just tonight, let it be okay." I smiled back. What my father didn't know, what no one in that room knew except the man currently standing near the window laughing with Penny's future in-laws, was that in approximately 15 minutes, someone was going to stand up and say my name in a way that would make my father's carefully constructed story about me collapse quietly in front of 40 of his closest friends. I wasn't there to cause that. I was there because my sister had written me a letter I'd read 4 times before I put it down. But it was going to happen all the same. The house I grew up in sat on a quiet street in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where every lawn was trimmed to the same height, and the appearance of a good life was tended as carefully as the flower beds. My father, Lawrence Morrow, had built his real estate development business from almost nothing, and by the time I was 10, he wore that fact like a second skin. He had earned something. He intended for his family to reflect it. I was the older daughter, and I understood from a young age that my role in the family's image was relatively simple: be presentable, be pleasant, and eventually marry someone appropriate and settle nearby. My sister Penny, 4 years younger, had absorbed this understanding effortlessly. She was warm and easy and knew how to make my father feel like the wisest person in the room. She wasn't performing it. She actually believed it. That was the difference between us that neither of us ever found the words to name. I was the difficult one. I asked too many questions at the dinner table. I finished books in a single sitting and then wanted to discuss them, which my father found exhausting. I had opinions about things he considered settled. And I cared about the wrong things. Not the wrong things morally, but the wrong things strategically, the things that didn't help anyone maintain the comfortable image he was trying so hard to project. I decided I wanted to be a cardiac surgeon when I was 14 years old. My grandmother had a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in November. I was in the waiting room of the hospital when the surgeon came out to speak to our family. She was a tall woman in her mid-40s, still in her scrubs, and she sat down next to my grandmother's husband and explained what had happened with a clarity and gentleness I had never seen in an adult before. She didn't soften the facts. She didn't fill the air with empty reassurances. She gave us exactly what we needed: the truth, delivered with enough steadiness that we could bear it. I watched her the entire time. The way she held herself, the way she spoke, the way the room seemed to settle around her presence like water finding its level. I thought, that is what I want to do, not some version of it, exactly that. My grandmother recovered. I never forgot the surgeon. For the next 4 years I worked toward medicine the way some people work toward escape, quietly, methodically, without making it the subject of dinner conversation. I took every science elective my high school offered. I applied to pre-med programs at universities within driving distance, and then, because I had also been thorough, to one program that was not within driving distance at all. The University of Michigan offered me a full merit scholarship in the spring of my senior year. I told my parents on a Sunday evening. My mother was in the kitchen. My father was in his chair by the window, newspaper across one knee. The kind of domestic scene that feels permanent until it isn't. "Michigan," my father said after I explained. He said it the way you say a word when you are deciding how you feel about it. "Full scholarship," I added, "pre-med." He took off his reading glasses. "You're planning to be a doctor?" "A cardiac surgeon, yes." He looked at me for a long moment. My mother appeared in the doorway and stayed there, drying her hands on a dish towel, watching. "That's a 15-year process minimum," my father said. "I know. Med school, residency, fellowship, you understand what that looks like?" "I understand what it looks like for a surgeon," I said. "That's what I'm focused on." His expression shifted, not to anger but to something harder and quieter. "You think you're going to give the best years of your life to a career that demands everything and leaves you nothing else?" "I think it will be a full life," I said. He shook his head slowly. "This isn't what I planned for you." "I know, but it's what I planned for me." The silence that followed was the kind that ends conversations permanently. My mother made a soft sound from the doorway. My father set his glasses on the side table with a deliberate, careful click. "If you go to Michigan for that program," he said, "don't come back here expecting things to be the same." I looked at him. I waited to see if he would take it back, the way you wait for a door to open that you already know is locked. He didn't. "All right," I said. I went upstairs, packed what I needed, and drove to a friend's house that night. 3 weeks later, I left for Ann Arbor with everything that fit in the back of my car and a very precise idea of who I intended to become. No one came downstairs to say goodbye. Medical school is not something that can be described completely from the outside. From the outside, it is long hours and expensive textbooks and a building that smells like disinfectant and never quite fresh coffee. From the inside, it is the slow, extraordinary experience of learning the mechanics of the thing that keeps every person alive. I loved it. That was what no one who hadn't done it could understand. I loved the difficulty. I loved the precision it demanded. I loved that it required you to become genuinely competent, not just convincingly confident, because the difference between those two things, in that particular field, was whether someone lived or died on a table. I did my residency in Cleveland. General surgery first, then cardiothoracic. 7 years. I lived in a small apartment 3 blocks from the hospital. I ate takeout and slept in 4-hour increments, and once, during a particularly brutal stretch of call weeks, I didn't see sunlight for 6 days. I did not mind. I had known going in that the work would cost something. I had decided before I left Ohio that whatever it cost, I would pay it. I called my mother once, during my 2nd year of residency. She answered on the 2nd ring. "Your father is still very hurt," she said, after we had exchanged exactly 4 sentences. I asked how she was doing. She said fine. I asked about Penny. "Penny is doing beautifully," she said, brightening. "Your father is so proud." I told her I was glad to hear it. I meant it. We hung up. I didn't call again. Penny wrote me a letter in my 3rd year, actual paper, in an envelope, with a stamp. She had always been like that. It said, simply, "I know you and Dad aren't speaking. I'm not taking sides, but I wanted you to know I think about you. I hope medicine is everything you wanted." I wrote back. We exchanged letters over the years that followed, intermittently, never about our parents, always about what was happening in our lives. It was a narrow bridge, but we kept it in place. That mattered later. The technique came out of a problem I had been thinking about for 3 years. Minimally invasive aortic valve repair had been improving for decades, but there was a specific anatomical variation, a particular combination of annular geometry and calcification pattern that appeared in roughly 8% of patients, that made the standard approach significantly riskier. I had seen 3 patients in 2 years who fit that profile. 2 of them did well. 1 did not, despite everyone doing exactly what they were trained to do. I kept thinking about the 3rd patient. I worked on a modified approach in whatever time I had, which was not much time. I ran simulations. I consulted with colleagues in Boston and Toronto. I refined it, then refined it again. I used the approach in a live case with the patient's full informed consent, and it worked cleanly. I documented everything. I used it 7 more times over the following 18 months. Same anatomical profile, same modification, meticulous outcome tracking at every step. The paper appeared in the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery 2 years later. A colleague named it for me in a follow-up citation before I noticed, which I found embarrassing but couldn't argue with. The Morrow technique. It was in use at 43 centers by the time I was appointed Chief of Cardiac Surgery at the Medical Center in Cleveland. I was 39. The appointment had nothing to do with who my father was or wasn't. It had to do with 20 years of consecutive presence, of difficult decisions made carefully, of one paper that kept appearing in other people's bibliographies. I stood on the steps outside the hospital the afternoon of the announcement and thought, Briefly, about a living room in Columbus, a chair by a window, reading glasses set down with a deliberate click. I had been right about the life. It was full, exactly as full as I had expected it to be. Penny's letter arrived on a Friday afternoon in March. Elaine, I'm engaged. His name is Brent Fairchild. He is kind and funny, and he actually listens when people talk, which I did not realize I had been missing until I found someone who did it. We're having an engagement party in June. I want you there. I know Dad will be there too. I know that's complicated, but you're my sister and I'm only getting engaged once, God willing, and I need you at the table. No pressure, but please come. I read it twice, then I sat with it for a while, in the particular quiet of a kitchen in the early morning before rounds. She had written no pressure and meant the opposite, and she knew I knew it, and that honesty was precisely why I had kept writing her letters for 2 decades when I had let everything else go. Penny had never pretended with me, even when she was pretending with everyone else. I wrote back 2 days later, I'll be there, congratulations. The morning of the party, I stood in front of my closet longer than I had stood in front of most decisions that week. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I was trying to decide who I was walking in as. I chose a dark green dress, simple, nothing that invited questions. The kind of outfit that lets a person move through a room without drawing attention. I drove to Columbus alone. The highway had that particular late afternoon light that turns everything briefly gold before the sun goes down. I had made this drive in the other direction 23 years ago. Aurelio's was the kind of restaurant that existed to make occasions feel significant. Low lighting, linen napkins, a sommelier who knew when to disappear. The private dining room was arranged with flowers and framed photographs and the warmth of a family that had been happy together for a long time. My mother saw me from across the room and went still for exactly 1 second before crossing toward me with her arms open. Elaine, she said into my shoulder. She was smaller than I remembered. That always surprised me. Penny appeared and hugged me hard enough that I stepped back. You came, she said, like she hadn't fully believed I would. I said I would. I know, but... She shook her head and laughed instead of finishing. Come meet Brent. Brent Fairchild was a tall man with an easy smile and the kind of attentive eye contact that signals either genuine warmth or a career in sales. As it turned out, both applied. He was vice president of operations at a hospital network, not mine, but one I knew by reputation. He shook my hand. Penny's talked about you, he said. Good things, I hope. She said you're a surgeon in Cleveland. I know that system pretty well, actually. Good people over there. They are, I said. I didn't tell him more. He didn't press. Penny appeared with champagne and pulled him away to greet new arrivals, and I found the bar and ordered sparkling water and let the party settle around me. That was when my father appeared at my elbow. He was not a man who had ever wasted time on indirect approaches. He came purposefully, the way he always had, with the air of someone who had already decided the outcome of the conversation. Penny invited you because she's a good person, he said quietly. Try not to make her regret it. I looked at him and felt, with some surprise, that I felt nothing sharp, not anger, not the old grief. Something much quieter and older than either of those things. The feeling you get when you return to a place you once lived and realize it no longer fits you, and understand that this is simply the truth, not a tragedy. It's good to see you, I said. He studied me. You look well. I am well. Still in medicine? Yes. He nodded the way people nod when they've already decided not to believe the answer. Hospitals are brutal to their people, the burnout, the turnover. He said it with the authority of someone who had read an article once. Some people burn out, I said, some don't. He scanned the room briefly with the automatic calculation of a man who had spent 40 years measuring every social space he entered. Then he looked back at me. Just remember, he said, this evening is about Penny, not about whatever point you might feel the need to make. I turned my glass slowly in my hand. I didn't come to make a point. Good. He finished his scotch and moved away, back toward a group of men near the far table who were waiting for him to arrive and be interesting. I stayed where I was. Penny across the room was laughing at something Brent had whispered. The candles on the tables were warm and low. Someone's child was asleep in the corner on a folded jacket. In 12 minutes, it turned out, someone was going to stand up and make a point that I hadn't asked anyone to make. The toast began the way engagement party toasts always begin, Brent tapping his glass lightly. the room easing into the indulgent quiet of people who like the couple and are prepared to be moved. "I'll be brief," he said, "because my future mother-in-law told me she cries at speeches and I respect that." Warm laughter. My mother pressed her fingertips to her collarbone. "I want to say something about Penny, obviously," Brent continued, "but I also want to say something about medicine." A few politely curious looks. My father shifted near the far wall. "In my work I deal with hospital systems, which means I deal with a great deal of data, outcomes, complication rates. The metrics that tell you, as objectively as anything can, whether a program is actually doing what it's supposed to do." He paused. 3 years ago, I was reviewing outcomes data for high-risk cardiac procedures across our network, and we kept encountering the same reference point in the literature. A surgical modification that had changed the standard of care for a specific patient population. The paper was meticulous. The outcomes were striking. And every center that had adopted the approach had seen measurable improvement in their most difficult cases. The room was listening now with actual attention. "I became, I'll admit, mildly obsessed with this paper," Brent said, with the self-deprecating smile of a man comfortable enough with his obsessions to name them. "I looked up everything I could find about the surgeon who developed it. I read her other work. I watched a Grand Rounds recording she gave at Johns Hopkins. I told myself, if I ever end up at an event where this person is present, I am going to introduce myself and say thank you." He looked across the dining room. His gaze found me. "What I did not know," he said with a slow shake of his head, "until about 45 minutes ago when I was looking at Penny's family photos near the entrance, is that Dr. Elaine Morrow has been standing in this room all evening." The silence was absolute. "Penny's sister," Brent said, "chief of cardiac surgery at one of the finest medical centers in this country. The surgeon behind the Morrow technique, which is now in use at over 60 institutions, and which, according to the most recent outcomes review I've read, has meaningfully reduced mortality in a high-risk patient population that previously had very limited options." He raised his glass. "I've been wanting to say thank you for 3 years," he said, and his voice had gone quiet and entirely genuine. "I didn't expect to get the chance at my own engagement party." He smiled. "But I am very glad that Penny has a sister like this, and I am very glad she came tonight. So if everyone would please raise a glass." The room came up. All of it. 40 people rising together, glasses lifted, faces turning to find me. Some expressions were confused, still catching up. Others were already warm with the particular pleasure of a surprise that turns out to be the good kind. "To Dr. Elaine Morrow," Brent said clearly. "And to my future wife, who has apparently been understating her family for the entire time I've known her." The applause started near the front table where Brent's parents were seated, his father already on his feet. It spread quickly, loose and genuine, the sound of a room that has just learned something and is glad it did. A woman I didn't recognize near the window was smiling broadly. Penny had both hands over her mouth and her eyes were bright. I raised my glass slightly in acknowledgement and looked across the room. My father was standing very still. His glass was half raised and motionless. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not the dismissal I knew full, not the particular blankness he deployed when he didn't know what to do with something. Something much quieter than all of those. Something that looked, from across a room full of people now beginning to talk again, like a man encountering a fact he had long since decided not to need. He found me later, when dinner was being served and the room had warmed back into celebration. Brent had already sought me out, a little embarrassed, a little earnest, to say I had absolutely no idea. I hope that wasn't. It was a kind thing, I told him honestly. Thank you. He looked relieved and moved on, and then my father was in front of me. He stood without his scotch this time. His hands were at his sides. He looked, for the first time in my living memory, like a man who was not certain where to put himself. "Chief of cardiac surgery," he said. "Yes." "In Cleveland." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Behind him someone laughed at a table and the sound floated past and was gone. "You never said anything," he said, "in all this time." I looked at him. "You never asked." That landed the way a plain fact lands when it also happens to be heavier than it appears. He absorbed it. I could see him doing it. "I assumed," he began. "I know what you assumed." He exhaled slowly, one hand moving briefly to the back of his neck, a gesture I remembered from childhood, the one he made when something had unsettled him. "I read about a technique, a year or two ago, a piece in a magazine about surgical innovation." He stopped. I didn't put it together. We have a common last name, I said. He almost smiled, almost. Elaine. He said it differently than he had earlier at the bar, different weight in it, a different frequency. I didn't know. I know you didn't. I wasn't cruel about it. I wasn't kind about it either. I was simply accurate, the way I was always accurate. You stopped expecting to. His jaw moved. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at me, and something in his posture shifted. Not the stiff self-possession of a man defending a position, just the simpler act of standing upright under a weight that had arrived unexpectedly. I'm glad you came, he said. And for the first time since I had walked through the door that evening, I believed he meant it. I came for Penny, I said, but I'm glad I came too. He extended his hand. I looked at it for a moment. When I was 22 years old, studying in a cold apartment and running on 4 hours of sleep, I had wanted something much larger than a handshake from this man. A concession. An acknowledgement. Some small evidence that throwing your daughter out for following her own life had been, in some way he could say aloud, a mistake. I had wanted that with the seriousness I had eventually learned to set down, because carrying it was not useful, and I had things to carry that were. 23 years changes what you need. It changes what you can offer in return. I took his hand. His grip was firm and a little uncertain. You've done well, he said quietly. I did the work I believed in, I told him. He nodded. Then he stepped back and the space between us remained, and neither of us tried to close it completely. Some distances don't collapse in a single evening. They just stop being the right shape for pain. I found Penny near the entrance an hour later. She pulled me into a long hug without saying anything first, which was exactly right. You could have warned me, I said into her hair. I didn't know, she said. I genuinely did not know he knew your work. I almost fainted when he started talking. She pulled back, eyes bright. Chief of Cardiac Surgery, Elaine. You could have mentioned it in one of your letters. I didn't want to make it a thing. It's a thing, she said. It's absolutely a thing. She squeezed my hands. Call me more, actual phone calls, not just letters. All right. I mean it. I know you do. I looked at her, my sister, standing in a room decorated for her happiness, surrounded by people who loved her without condition. He's good, I said, nodding toward Brent across the room. He's genuinely good. Her whole face changed, the way it does when someone says out loud the thing you've been most hoping to hear. I know, she said softly. I really do. I shook Brent's hand once more on the way out. He said again that he hadn't intended to ambush me, and I told him again that what he had done was a generous thing, and I meant it both times. Outside, the June night was cool and easy, the kind that carries the smell of cut grass and warm pavement, and something faintly green from the trees lining the parking lot. I stood beside my car for a moment before getting in. 23 years ago I had left this city with my future still entirely unbuilt, and nothing to protect it with except a quiet certainty that I was not wrong. My father had been so confident I would fail that he had stopped paying attention, had built a story out of my absence, filled in the gaps with the narrative that was most comfortable, and believed it because the alternative required a curiosity he had never thought to extend to me. I had never once needed him to revise that story. I had simply kept going until the facts made it impossible for him to sustain. That was the thing I had learned, somewhere between my first overnight call and the 40th year of my life. Other people's closed doors are not your ceiling. They are simply their closed doors. You do not have to stand on their porch waiting for them to open. You build your own entrance and walk through it, and you keep walking. And the life that comes from that forward motion is yours in a way that no approval could ever make it. Dignity had never been something my father could give me. It had never been something I needed him to. I got in the car. I took the highway back north through the dark, and the city of Cleveland appeared on the horizon the way it always did. A cluster of lights against the black, particular and familiar and entirely mine. I parked in my usual spot, walked up to my apartment, made a cup of tea. On the kitchen table, a journal article I'd been meaning to finish reviewing. In my inbox, a message from a training program in Denver asking if I would consider presenting at their grand rounds in the fall. I sat down with the article. The city outside my window kept on, the way cities do, indifferent and busy, full of people carrying their own weight through their own years, most of them doing it quietly, without recognition, without anyone standing up at a dinner party to say their name. I had learned, long before tonight, that this was not a lonely thing. It was simply the shape of a life built on your own terms. And sitting there in a quiet kitchen in Cleveland with a cup of tea and work still left to do, I could tell you, honestly, without performance, that it was more than enough. It had always been.